All right, so our next part, as per the label, is we're going to work on the Apex controller. This is our server-side controller for this component. It's going to help us compile the data that we're going to display. In this controller, we need to get the sum of the total spend, and separately the sum of the total products, but only for the related account we're viewing on the screen. There really are two ways we can do this. We can get all the relevant records and sum those records through a loop, or we can use an aggregate results query. To keep this simple, I'm using the first method rather than trying to explain aggregate results queries, which are a little more advanced. Our method needs to use @or enable, so the results are available to the Lightning OR component. And please keep in mind that with the next release, every profile or permission set that needs visibility to this component will need to be given security access to this Apex class. As we do our Apex class, we want to try to make sure we follow best practices. We want to make sure our code is clear and readable. We want to use useful commenting. I will include a documentation box at the end. We want to code within governor limits. We want to keep our SOCL outside of loops. We want to use bulkification if we can. And we want to make sure ultimately we have a test class that provides good code coverage. If there's anything I forgot, please feel free to share. When we write our test class, we're going to actually have a minimum of 2. In here, I say minimum of 3 because I kept this separate when I originally wrote the handout. But basically, our test setup, our test of the total spend and the total products. We're going to create records in the test setup for both account and sales summary. We want to make sure we know what's expected, what those sums should be. And each test method, we're going to use the Apex controller that we previously created to supply us with that value and compare our expectation. And we're really working only to get minimum coverage here. If this were our real org, I'd definitely do some negative testing. So what would happen if I had no data? I'm not sure what else I would try, but maybe some bulk as well. Possibly. It's kind of harder to do bulk though when you're looking at screens. So with that, I'm going to move over to the handout. Handout's out here. I've shared the link in the chat. When you're ready to, feel free to go to it. But we're going to basically start by creating a new Apex class and call it Sales Summary Component Controller. I'm going to just copy the name here, go back to my org, and I'm going to go in Developer Console. There's nothing to say you can't do this with VS Code or another IDE and use the CLI to push code into your org. This is just the easiest way for me to do this in Gopher org. So I'm going to say new Apex class, put in the name of that class, say OK. And I've got the start of my component class. Back to the handout. So my first thing is to create my first method, which we're going to call getTotalSpend. We're going to include the @or enabled. And I don't have a lot else in here for you. So we also, and I forgot to open, I have my handy cheat to get me going, which I will share at the end, I promise. So our first class, the getTotalSpend, we have to remember our @or enabled. It's I'm actually going to copy this because this will be faster because typing is not going to be fast for me today. So I'm going to paste it in. I'm going to go through it. I will make this available to everybody as well. So they'll be able to use it. So our @or enables the first piece that has to be there for it to be, for the Lightning component to be able to see it. Our method is a public method. We are declaring it static. We're returning a decimal when we're done. We're calling it get total spend, and we're passing it the ID of the account record that we are working with. That ID will be passed through because of the force record data. So I start off with my declaring my decimal for my total spend. I'm setting it to 0 to start. I'm going to create a list of our sales summary records by running a query. That query is going to pull the ID and the total spend. I'm going to only pull it where my account is my related account. Remember, using this colon lets us use the pass in the field or that we're passing in. And I'm going to make sure my total spend isn't null. So I only want records where I actually have a value. I'm doing that just basically to save time and keep my record count lower. Depending on your org, you might, if you were doing an average, you might actually want every record to get, no matter what the value was. I'm checking the size, making sure I actually got records back, so that if I don't, I will just end up returning the 0 that I originally set. Then I'm running a loop. And my loop says, hey, let's look for each sales summary record in the list we created. I want to go through and change my total sum spend to be the sum spend plus from the resulting record that I'm adding in the total spend field. Fairly simple loop. I'm just adding on each time we pass through. And at the end, I want to return my total sum spend. Pretty straightforward. Then we do the same thing for the total products. And actually, one of the simplest ways to do this, I'm missing an end parenthesis, an end bracket. So let's make sure we've got that end bracket. I'm going to come and I'm actually going to copy this entire class. Paste it in here. So the next part from our handout, if I go back to the handout, is the second method. We want to call it get tot prod. And obviously we're going to use total products instead of total spend. So on the second one, make sure I'm on the second one, I'm going to call it tot prod. I'm going to here some tot prods. The field is total products. All right, products. I'll have to update this. And I think I've got everything. My problems just went away. So I can hit save, and it should save. It might take a little bit. And I have my class. Of course, if I was following good practice, I would add a documentation box. Documentation boxes help us know what we have in our code, including things like when and where, when and who created the class, some possibly a list of the methods and a short description, space for an updated log, and space to or listing the test class we write. I typically put these immediately after the class declaration. Actually, sorry, I'm going back and cheating on the typing. My finger is not doing the best from the stitches that I had put in it. Paste this in and show you what it looks like. I kind of make sure I know I'm in a doc box by using a few extra asterisks and asterisk in each line so I remember it's a comment. Really, I only need the slash and an asterisk to start and an asterisk slash to end it. As I mentioned, I put my created date. Today is the 28th, so I won't read that. I list my two methods. So I've got total prod, spend, total prod. It'd be nice if I listed the name right. Actually, let me check my example version to make sure I am using the right name. Yeah, total prod. I just basically stated that they're summarizing. I left room for my update log, and I list what my test class will be. I don't have it yet, and then I can hit save. And so out of good practice, I should start my test class, which is a new Apex class. Add my is test. I'm going to make it private. And yes, I already have this one set to my first part is to add the test setup. I'm going to walk through this. So I declare my test setup before my private method. So my method's private static. It's void because you can't return anything from a test class. And I've given it the name test data setup. In it, I start by creating an account. So I'm just creating a single account using only the bare minimum of what's required to create a record. If this is a new org that I'm working in, only the name would be required. It's quite possible that in the org I'm working on, I might have other things required and might need to add to it. Then I'm going to create some sales summary records. I'm going to do this via a list that I'm going to iterate through so I get multiple records. So I'm going to run this 5 times. So I'm setting an integer of I equal to 0, running it 5 times, adding each time. I'm creating a new sales summary record. I'm setting the month end to based on the month. So if the month is 0, it'll be 1. If it's 1, it's 2 for which iteration. I'm actually using the first of the month because I didn't feel like calculating out the last day. It's a test class, it'll work. I could use the first of the month. I know I named it month end, but that's okay. I'm setting the total spend. I'm actually using a multiplier here. So my first record, since it's I times 200, will be 0. My second one will be 200, and so on. My number of products. And you could set a straight number. You don't actually have to get fancy like this. I just wanted a little bit of variability. For my products here, I'm saying I plus 1, so I always have at least one product. And I'm multiplying that by 5. So my first record will have 5, my second will have 10, and so on. I'm setting the account equal to the account I created above. Note, I do not have to query to get that account ID. And then I add it to my list. To follow the best practice of bulkification, I actually do my DML, my inserting those records outside of the loop. And that's the setup. So then we actually have to do the test of the methods. So again, for the sake of sharing and quick, I'm going to copy what I previously wrote and walk through it. So my next test class, I have my is test. It's a static void, and I'm just calling it test total spend. Test total spend. First, I start by getting the account. Mostly because I want to make sure I've got the account. I use that account then to run and create a list of the sales summary records, and I just check the size of it. I want to make sure I have sales summary records for this run before I actually run my test. So that's why I've got this here. So I actually kind of run that query. I'm just selecting the ID, and then I'm just checking the size. Then I start my test. I set a field equal to running that controller with the get total spend passing in the ID of the account, and then I stop my test. The reason for the test start and test stop in here is because, one, it resets any governor limits for within this run, so that gets a fresh governor limit. It's also a best practice. And then I check my value. So based on how I set up my data, I know that my total spend should be 2,000 if I add it all together. So I'm checking that against the value I get. So I'm just going to save this. And I know I've only done one of the test classes I talked about. Sure, there are no problems. It's taking its time saving. But it's saved. And I'm actually going to come here and I'm going to run this test. Of course, I should have moved over to test first, but and run over here to test, I can see it passed. And if I check my controller, which is still open, I can see I'm at 50% coverage because I have covered the first method, but not the second method. So at this point in the handout, I'm on the test class section. So the first method is set up. Again, the second method, I can actually repeat. Well, that was the second method, sorry. The third method, actually, I can actually repeat what I did, or I could actually add it into the existing query and check there. I'm actually going to do the repeat this time. I'm going to come back to my test class. I'm actually going to copy the entire second method. Paste it in. This time I'm going to test tote prod. So I'm just going to leave in pulling the account. I'm going to leave in checking for the number of records. It's okay to do so. Won't hurt anything. I'm going to instead call total products. I'm going to change the name of this field so it doesn't confuse me later. And if you remember in my test setup, I'm using multiples of 5, and I'm going to have 5 of those. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 added together, which should be, let's see, 75, I think. Right, so I'm kind of guessing, but I think it's 75. I'm going to save. And then I'm going to run. And I'm going to let it run both test classes since we know the first one works. And the second one worked. Yes, I was right, it was 75. And now when I check my controller, I can see I have full code coverage. Interestingly with this, I've got slight percentage more than I had before on the first one. And the second method that we just created is only covering the second of our classes. I'm going to make sure I grab this link so I can share it in the chat with everybody. Unless, of course, Orlando already did. Nope. Answering questions. So there's the link if you want to be able to quickly get the code and not take forever. More than happy to share. I'm actually going to stop the recording and open it up to questions. So let me stop sharing. And stop recording.